So been cleaning up some stuff, and I cleaned up a mess of files, and I just recycled them. And I found this, and Elaine's just surprised that I still have it. But this is when I tried out for San Carlos Christian Church in 1993. These are papers. So this is the bulletin from the Sunday that I actually visited your church, January 24th, 1993. And this was what the bulletin looked like. These were all the responsibilities that Kerry typed out for me that if I would have been hired, he would have had me do. But he did not hire me. Personality test he had me take, just job description. Oh, here's the itinerary for Bruce and Elaine. Youth activity bowling at Galaxy Lanes. Attend a softball game. Formal interview in an informal setting. Place Alan and Gail Davis's house. Yeah. So these are letters from Kerry along the process, and they were all nicely typewritten with enclosures and stuff like that. You know, Kerry did a magnificent job writing me letters along the process. Then when he says, "It ain't you," he wrote it in handwriting. I thought that was pretty nice. It was just really nice, a handwritten letter to say, "No, thank you, but, go away." So I thought that was really fun to kind of look through. And the fact that Elaine says, "I can't believe you have that." Anyway, it was just kind of fun to look at. But here I am now. Go figure. Where in the world did that? What a journey. What a journey, huh? January 24, 1993. And do you know, I kid you not, I ain't making this stuff up. Jasper, you know I ain't lying. Okay, you ready? Kerry preached on that day, Job 2, healing for the sick. For real. So, yeah, it never goes out of... Excuse me. I don't think we approve that, but...
My granddaughter, 25 years old, sent me a ticket.
Oh, that's nice. That's real nice. Well, it's good to see you back. Sorry to see you go again. But, yes. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better. We had a lot of people have been praying for you, so it's good to see you. So now we're finally going to get to some good stuff in Job. It's been pretty back and forth, and I have done some highlights where we're not going verse by verse. It's really hard not to, because, you just really get caught, and I don't want to say in the weeds on this, because it's really good stuff, to glean and learn from these conversations that they've been having, these brothers, these friends. But we had the first two chapters in Job where we set up the story, the meeting in heaven, the introduction to Job, the afflictions to Job and his life, and then for the last 35 chapters, we've been in the middle of this book. And we've heard the rhetoric from his friends Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, and then the last 6 chapters, just last week, from a friend named Elihu. Nothing but bad counsel, unhelpful advice, misguided help. And so I thought to illustrate that, it's kind of like the bad marriage advice that I got from some yahoos named Johnny and Chachi. You've probably seen them on video before, Johnny and Chachi. They wear bad wigs. Anyway, they came up with 7 killer marriage tips. They actually did it with Gary Smalley when he was alive. And by the way, Bill and Brooke, we have a young man in the back who speaks Spanish only. So he decided to stay. So I want you to be able to talk to him afterwards and just welcome him if you would, okay? So thank you. So they'll talk to you. English un poquito. Something like that. Anyway, 7 killer marriage tips. And they go like this. When you're in an argument with your wife, just tell her to calm down. 7 killer marriage tips by Johnny and Chachi. Number 2, remind her of the cost of vacations. Number 3, anytime she tells you about one of her purchases, just respond with a fist pump combined with the cash register sound called cha-ching. So 7 killer marriage tips. Gather your thoughts with a good comeback while she's talking. It's always helpful to be prepared with what you're going to say while she's talking. It makes you better prepared. Put your spouse in timeout when you don't agree with her. It will help her to see things from a different perspective, and they add, hopefully, yours. And as a bonus, if she gives you any pushback, tell her it's hard to tell her apart from the children. 7 killer marriage tips. Anyway, last one. Always finish your wife's sentences for it tells her that you know what she's thinking, and she's very predictable. So these are some bad advice pieces that I guess I really don't want you to use. So, hey Dave, good to see you, brother. So these are, I thought they were funny, but only in a bad way. So about advice, for my birthday, I got a bag of jerky from, I think, Walgreens or something. Anyway, inside of it, I'm munching on this thing. It went in 2 days. I'm munching on this thing, and there's this thing in here. It says, do not eat. So I'm thinking this is in the area of good advice. Ne pas manger, no comer, nayo inge. How would you say this? Nayo ingerer. Anyway, all of it's saying, do not microwave, do not eat. And so I think that's good advice. I have no idea what's in there, but they just put it in there, and it is not jerky, just so you know. Only because after the first bite, I read it later to find out that it is not jerky. So anyway, some advice is good, but basically the friend's counsel was bad advice. And so now we get to the good stuff because God speaks, so we're going to get right into it. First of all, God finally speaks to Job. Job 38 is where we're going to be at. We're going to spend the entire time in Job 38. It's hard to get away from this one. I don't know whether we'll do 1 or 2 more weeks with God speaking, but at least we're doing 38. The Lord answered Job out of the storm. And I think this is an excellent segue to what Elihu was talking about. Because remember what Elihu was talking about last week? He was going to look at the clouds, look at the storm brewing, look at the lightning, look how God makes all this stuff. So he's setting all this up. And all of a sudden, the next chapter, God speaks out of the storm. Now, some of your translations have tempest. Some of them have whirlwind. But Elihu has just described the Lord as coming like a storm or great clouds, thunder, lightning, and he was giving counsel to Job. And it seems like such this great segue to be able to, from this storm that was brewing, that the Lord spoke from this storm. Some commentators, which I'm not for sure where they get this from because everything goes back to tempest, seems to be an original translation, but some commentators say hurricane. But why go there? We already know what that looks like. God can speak through a hurricane, but usually you're not keeping 20-year-old files after a hurricane. So anyway, he speaks from the storm, through the storm. Now, also noticing in this text is God speaks to Job. He doesn't talk to the friends. He speaks directly to Job, and he answers Job. It does not say that he answered the 4 friends. Now, here's what's interesting. All that Job had been asking of God. Why am I suffering? Why do the innocent suffer like this? He's continually put back to his friends and to God. Why is this happening? And for what reason? And he desired a hearing with God. And what's funny, not in a ha-ha way, but what's funny is God answers him in ways that doesn't seem like he's answering Job. Now, this entire 4 chapters, we're going to look at this stuff going, were you not listening to Job's questions? It seems like you're talking completely different in what Job is asking. Verse 2 says, who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Now, all of that, the very first time I was studying this and reading this, it's hard to do this really soft and without a British accent. He seems a little stern, but it seems like almost a Wizard of Oz. who are you? And it's the smoke and the fire. It just seems that, who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Who are you? And then verse 3 says, brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. And I think this is classic because Job's been questioning God the entire time, and now God gives the questions. God does not answer Job's questions. God never even addresses any of Job's questions. None of them. He barrages Job with a series of questions about Job's mere humanness and God's great power. Now, Jesus, I may have done this, but my memory is, I'd have to go back and look in the archives. If I had taught on a whole series of Jesus asking questions, answering questions to questions that were given to him, I may have done that. But he does it a lot. I don't know how many times I didn't count. But here's a couple of them, examples of Jesus answering questions with questions. On one occasion, out of Luke 10, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said, what is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? And one of my favorites, John 18, and there's numerous ones in the New Testament. John 18, Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus said, is that your own idea? Or did others talk to you about me? Jesus was classic. And he said, remember the one time when he's telling the parable, I think of the sower. And he's telling this parable, and somebody says, why do you speak in parables? He goes, well, I speak in parables. And he goes off on this tirade of stuff, and it's like, now I got more questions about your answer than what I originally asked. And I think Jesus did this in a way to draw us in. I think that he didn't, as he said, cast pearls before swine. The idea of, I want to draw you in. And I think questions do that. You've been in conversations where it's primarily about whoever's talking, maybe. And to be able to ask questions is a drawing in to say, I really care about you. I want relationships. I want to hear your heart. And so Jesus does this in a masterful way. And the Lord has a way of taking our questions and turning them around to engage us. And I think questions do draw you in. Answers seem to end a dialogue. Oh, okay. Well, then it's almost like, the 911 butterball line. Okay. Oh, okay, thanks. I mean, you're not looking to hang out with butterball phone people. You're looking for an answer. So it's not relational at all. It's informational. And so answers have a way of doing that. Questions draw you in together. And in the next 4 chapters that God speaks, the Lord asks Job some say 60 questions, depending on the version. Some say 77. In 4 chapters, God asks between 60 and 77 questions. It's fascinating. Number 2, God questions Job about what he doesn't know. This is really good. This is almost classic parenting 101. You asking your young children who are in elementary, and you ask them questions that are way beyond anything. Now, why in the world would you have ever done anything like that? I mean, you leave them unarmed. You can't do that. You ask a question of a young child, and you think that you're going to get an answer, and you just go, this is like talking to a wall here. But we do that in general with questions. God goes through a series of 8 areas of questioning what Job doesn't know. There's no other way for you to understand your place with God than for God to show you himself and your place underneath his sovereignty and his power and his authority. So here's a couple of those things that we're going to go through really kind of quick. The secrets of the world. Job 38, 4-7. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. Now, I don't believe this is an angry response. And you can take it kind of sternly. You really can. But this is a loving father who is redirecting incorrect thinking back to himself. God is giving Job, through all these questions, a greater understanding of who God is. So, now, this sounds like no duh, but really, Instead of focusing on yourself, Job, which is always a problem for us, is it not? Think about your prayer life. What does it look like many times when you're talking about, I need, God, I want you to? That's a lot of that conversation. It's butterball hotline many times. And instead of focusing on yourself, God says to Job, I want to redirect your focus on me. The God who made the universe. Were you there? Did you lay the footers? Did you pull the permits, Job? Did you do any of this work? Now think about your situation. Think about your lot in life, your dilemmas, your frustrations, your pains, all of it. Being given up to God, and he simply responds with the request, where were you when I put the sun up in the sky? And you're just like, that's not what I asked. That wasn't the request that I gave you, God. I was looking more for, hey, my wife needs healing. Hey, my life is, I'm backed up in my finance. Well, where were you when I laid the footers of the earth? I don't think I was there. I mean, it's a very interesting pushback. This is the God of the universe answering Job in all of his suffering. Now, I know if I were God, we might play the book of Job completely different. We'd give Job a big hug. We'd say, how can I help? Let me cook you a nice warm meal. It's like, man, I'm so sorry this has happened to you. And God doesn't do any of that. Where were you when I made all this stuff? Did you measure the expanse of the sky from the constellations from the surface of the earth, Job? Did you portion out the waters, the mountains, the streams, and the earth? Did you mix all the elements of the air and make it breathable? Did you do any of that, Job? And you kind of, like if you're a real sensitive person and you're offendable, then you can kind of look at this and go, geez, all I just was asking. You don't have to get so, wow, God, that's, But Job responds differently out of all of this. You're going to watch this, and it's going to be amazing. And God goes on and on and on and on. Well, at least 60 questions in these 4 chapters to remind Job of the right questions to ask, to remind me of the right questions to ask God. Secondly, he goes into the boundaries of the sea. That's in 8 through 11. He says this, who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds in garment and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I mixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, this far you may come and no farther, here is where your proud waves halt. He talks about storing up and shoring up where the waters are going to be so that there can be dry ground. Then he goes on to the nature of the earth. He looks at verse 12. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges and shake the wicked out of it? The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Its features stand out like those of a garment. The wicked are denied their light, and their upraised arm is broken. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me if you know all of this. He's just getting started, by the way. He goes on, comprehending the light and darkness in the sky. And he says this in verse 19 through 24. Tell us what we should say to him. Oh, I'm sorry. I got in the wrong one. What is the way to the abode of light, and where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Surely you know, for you were already born. You have lived so many years. I mean, really. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Wow. Or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle. What is the way to the place where the lightning is dispersed, or the place where the east winds are scattered over the earth? Now, when I think of each of these areas that God is continuing to expel to him, I picture God as the ringmaster. That was what the picture that came into my mind. So he's got the top hat, the red coat that goes on the tails. He's got the baton thing, and he goes, if you'll look your attention right over here. And it's almost like he's going, and in this circle here, right to your left, look at this. Job, what do you think? Did you make any of this stuff, Job? And it's almost like he's just on display. And God is just revealing himself in ways that maybe in all of our suffering and all of our frustration to be able to go, wow, you are an amazing God. Just think how redirecting our stuff onto the power and the vastness and the beauty of God changes our perspective. By the way, typically we can do that in worship, when we're in Scripture, when we're in prayer, and we focus on him. It's a different deal on how we view ourselves if we're truly seeking him with a humble heart. God, it's not that he becomes bigger, but he becomes bigger in our viewpoint after getting off of us and onto him. It's a completely different view. My life, man, I can get all kinds of pitiful, sarcastic, nasty, negative, critical. Oh, yeah, there's more lists of that. I'm telling you, when you start to look at your stuff, you can get all kinds of bitter. It doesn't take long. And we're talking flashes of mere seconds of thought to be able to go, oh, yeah. I'm telling you, it just happens. We got in the Ford Edge. We take it every Sunday here. Lane drives it to work, and you push a button, and it goes, kick, 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 kick. What? Well, why now? It just ran yesterday. And this morning, we're dressed, we're ready to pick up Laura, and like, kick, 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 that clicked sound, like that's usually dead battery. And like, why now? And it's amazing how your thoughts change. I mean, I'm ready to think about, okay, ministry today, what we're going to preach on, and I'm like, daggum car. And I mean, it was so quick. By a push of a button went my attitude. It's amazing, is it not? And you don't have to go, well, I was in a good lane, been in prayer, been in the Word, got up early. Like, man, I was stunned at how quickly I changed. And so, when I think about Job looking at all these, I hate to use three-ring circus because I think he has more rings than three. But when you look at the light and the darkness in the sky, isn't it wonderful? By the way, Job, did you do any of that stuff? Did you have your finger in any of it? Did you give me any ideas? No. I did all of that stuff. And continue to look around at the things I'm showing you. I am the artist who made up these things, Job. Now, I'm doing this in the middle of it. God isn't doing this, but I'm just saying, and now, after I've shown you partially what I've shown you about myself, do you trust me now? Are you willing to go, do you trust me? I mean, this is an amazing thing. Instead of God just giving these simple answers, which we would think, well, it'd be really logical, God, but God showing himself going, do you trust me? I think this is a beautiful picture. And I like the fact that God gives us better than we ask for. Is that amazing? I mean, our asks sometimes are pretty small. We ask so laterally, so small. And to be able to go that God, the creator of the universe, who spoke it into being, is this powerful God, greater than the Wizard of Oz. Another one, understanding rain. Go to 25, verse 25. Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain and a path for the thunderstorm to water and a land where no man lives? That's a very interesting verse. A desert with no one in it, to satisfy a desolate wasteland and make it sprout with grass. Does the rain have a father? Who fathers the drops of dew? From whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? When the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of the deep is frozen. Now, there's a couple of funny things in this thing, by the way. I find fascinating. An interesting side note that Would you have ever thought that God is going to talk about stuff to Job that possibly has never seen? In the region where he may have been, there's no floating chunks of ice on the sea. That God would talk about things that you've never seen before. I think it's hilarious. I just think it's like, let me just tell you about some stuff about me. And isn't it funny that, okay, so far I've gotten everything, you've made all this stuff, and what are you talking about, ice on sea? What a frozen sea? What are you talking about? I think it's just funny when I thought about it. The surface of the deep denotes the sea. Imagine that the sea is frozen. Something that you've never seen or imagined, but God is now taking credit for it. I just find it fascinating. There's so much in Scripture that is described that we may have never experienced ourselves, but that does not make God's case any less powerful. You may say, well, I've never experienced that. I don't even know what he's talking about. And okay. It doesn't make God any less powerful or any less good. It kind of reminds me of a tree falling in the forest making a crashing noise when nobody's around. Because God is. All of creation, think about this, before any human may be in any forest, there's the sound of streams, waterfalls, birds, elephants trumpeting, all making a sound that maybe man hadn't even heard yet, and God's making all these noises going, yeah, wait till you see some of this stuff, wait till you hear it. All of these things, we continue to discover things that God already made. Right? We continue to do that. It's 2023 and we keep going, didn't know that. Did you know that there was this fish? Oh, we went clear down to the bottom of this. We'd never seen anything like this before. Oh, look at this. There's a new planet. Oh, there's a whole new cluster of stars. We got a better telescope now. We continue to find things that he made a long time ago. We're continuing to discover things that he's probably talked about going, oh, yeah, he's made it all. He did all this stuff. And I think it's wonderful, the fact that we have not got it all figured out yet. And I think that's okay, because sometimes there's a smugness and arrogance to sometimes being super smart and having a lot of intelligence and a lot of push-button things to us to have it right there in our hands to think, I've got all these answers. And to be able to many times say, I don't know. I have no idea. They may give you answers here, but I just don't know. And so, I also think it's strange that God can send rain wherever he wants to send rain. I know Josh isn't here, and he's been praying for rain in regards with the golf course that he works on. But he can withhold rain where it's needed. And he can give an overabundance of rain where it's not. And we look at it, we do. We look at it as something's wrong. Oh, this universe is all messed up. And if you think that God has any say-so in weather or the elements or this earth and going, he's a lot more sovereign than we are. And by the way, he can start to answer some of your questions. Well, why is it flooding over in California? And why is so many hurricanes and the warmness of the sea? And God would go like, Did you make the sea? Did you make any of this? Did you make mudslide? Did you do any of that stuff? And I don't think that God is destroying things on purpose. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there's a whole lot more sovereignty in God of things that he is in charge of and controls that we don't. Because he says it here to Job. Do you think it's me who can bring water to where it's not needed, or bring it or not bring it where it's desperately needed? Who do you think can do that? He tells Job that God would allow for abundance of food to some nations. In other nations, there is famine and starvation. I don't know. Here's the deal. The moment that we start to make answers a priority for our questions, that's when we move to make the world, the planet, and us as center of God's universe. We start to do that. We make it about me and us. We do that all the time. And because this place leaves us in dazed and confusion and questions, and the more we get some answers from people who think that they know the answers, the more we go, "Oh, I'm even more confused. It doesn't make any sense." And you go back to the Word of God going, "Who do you think makes all this stuff?" I get it. It's me. And it just like sets everything straight. Going, "Oh, God's in control. He's sovereign God. He's got everything under control. And do I trust him?" Because if you look sideways enough, you can certainly be distrustful and cynical. Oh yeah, this place has a way of eating your lunch because of how much stuff goes on that is unjust or ain't right to you or whatever. And we see God just saying, "I am God in control." And he says this to Job. By the way, I want to assume that everything that he's talking to him at this point, that he still has boils and he still has lost everything. But the moment that we move into those areas of seeking those things, we end up elevating those answers to those questions higher than God. And I think that's when we can get ourselves truly in trouble and off view of God, the centerpiece, the architect, the artist, and the focal point. And God is doing this with Job on purpose. It's not a mistake. It's not a braggart thing. He is focusing Job to say, "Look at me. All of your pain, all of your problems, all your sorrows, all your suffering, everything that we experience always will be the answer, God, every single time." Next one, constellations, the nature of the constellations, 31 through 33, he says this. "Can you bind the beautiful Pleiades? Can you loose the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth?" Now, probably nobody knows this band, but I thought about it. I think every time I hear that particular verse, there's a band that I really like called King's X. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. You should, by the way. King's X. They started out as believers and lost their way, but great writings up in the very beginning. And they quote Job out of one of their early songs. And every time I read this, I can't think about this this guitar riff that just, and I'm going, I don't think that'll play here. Nobody will know King's X. So I play that in my mind about because he says, "Who can restrain Pleiades or know the laws of heavenlies?" How many times have we been wrong before? That's the line that it goes. It's like, we can't do any of that stuff. We can do none of it. Job, do you think you can set all the constellations in the sky up and keep them in perfect order every single day since creation? That the constellations have not moved in their order from only the viewpoint of the earth. Every single day, you look at all of those constellations, they don't change. And you think about all the different rotations of the planet in our own solar system, and he's got some of them turning and twisting different ways, that some of them go slower, some of them go faster, some of them take a longer time than going around the sun. And you go, that's all mixed up. But everything that's out there, you look, he made these stars in the sky with all their same constellations every single day. Only from the vantage point of the earth. Why would God do that? Now, he gave us some indication in the beginning of Genesis what these signs would be for, to mark seasons, et cetera, et cetera. And there is some, I don't want to do that. Anyway, there is some modern Christian people who believe that the original constellations, the 12 or 13 of them, of the zodiac, were the gospel and the stars. There is some teaching on that. If you've ever read anything about that, it's pretty fascinating to think about, the fish, the Pisces that were given out to feed the 5,000, that Virgo being the Virgin Mary, and all these things that God originally set these out to be able to tell his story. I don't think it's too far off. I don't know if I can go there because it doesn't say that specifically in Genesis, so it's hard to make it. But it's really an interesting study if you ever want to look at that. It's called The Gospel and the Stars. Why would he make these constellations? Just as signs for seasons and other things. So anyway, it's one of those things that, hey, you can look at it, but I'm not going to put my bookmarker in it, but it's very fascinating just the same. But don't you think it's funny that all those constellations are only visible from the viewpoint of the earth? every single day. Same. All those, gazillions of stars out there, just all the same. The nature of clouds and weather, another place that he goes in 34 through 38. Can you raise your voice to the clouds and cover yourself with a flood of water? Do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you? Here we are. That almost sounds like a Dr. Seuss thing. Who endowed the heart with wisdom or gave understanding to the mind? Who has the wisdom to count the clouds? Who can tip over the water jars of the heavens? And when the dust becomes hard and the clods of earth stick together. Job was not only powerless over the starry sky and the constellations, he was powerless over the clouds. He was powerless over the weather. He's powerless over the natural elements. He's powerless over mudslides, floods, droughts, hurricanes, and tornadoes. Job's intellectual capacity was not the product of random chance or mysterious processes. It was designed by a great creator, and so were you. He is a great designer and creator. Our modern culture, with all its new inventions and technology, has come from God, but we make it seem like we're the glorious ones who came up with such great ideas. You guys are geniuses, aren't you? And so we have these incredible minds. Why are they incredible? Because many times they're more incredible than mine. That's why they're incredible. Anybody that has a greater mind than I is a genius. You're just like, wow, I don't know how they do that kind of stuff. And so tedious with little small things, looking through magnifying glasses to figure stuff out. And so we look at this, and it's so easy then to put statues up and encyclopedias of these great people, great minds, great inventors who have done great things. Even toying with the idea of artificial intelligence, which I think is an oxymoron in itself. It's very interesting. Yet with all of our increased knowledge, as wonderful and glorious as it is, our culture is not really even that much closer to answering the why questions, ever. As smart as we've gotten on technology, to go, well, why does this happen? Did you put up the stars in the sky? Did you do the footers? Did you pull the permits? We live with all these questions, like Job. And we have filled in small details around the edges, but I believe there's a vast gap between the knowledge and the wisdom of man and that of God. And if we don't understand that God is way superhuman than humans, if we don't get that he is sovereign and Lord, then we miss out on this idea that and I think sometimes in our modern thinking that we think that we can figure out God completely and every nuance and he is so vast. To think that you could capture the essence of God altogether and have arrived somewhere in your lifetime really puts God down at a very small level to think that you got it. Well, I got my doctorate in theology. And you go, okay, so what? You think God is not bigger than your doctorate that you figured out who God is. And this is the beauty of what Job is hearing from God. He's hearing, oh, your questions are really, really small. Let me just tell you about myself. And he just goes on something, this beautiful description, really, by these questions about how huge and wonderful and beautiful God is. So I do think that there is a gap of knowledge and wisdom and understanding. Now, I will say this. You can be really book smart, and there's a difference between knowing God that brings about godly wisdom. And that kind of stuff is a real difference maker. To be able to think that you understand all kinds of stuff and equations and whatnot, those are very helpful and good, especially if you're building a bridge. You want those things to work. You want to be able to have the algebraic equations that does all that. But how much do you miss when you do not know God? It's a difference maker. And so to be able to have that kind of wisdom, that we have the Holy Spirit in us as followers of Jesus, that we have his word, that we can actually have access to the throne of God because of the cross, we have been given so much. We might say that God's approach to Job in this section undercuts much of modern thinking. It makes us ask questions. What do men and women with all of our reason and wisdom really know about God's world? We truly don't know very much, so we must pursue knowledge with a humble trust in God who does know it all. That's the only way we approach this understanding of being able to study. And so To what end? And I've said this before, all of our studies and all of our wisdom that we build up, all of the things that we understand, for what? To know God better, but to also be a blessing on this planet. I think lastly what he does here is understanding the animal kingdom at the last of this text. It goes to the end of the chapter, I believe, 39. Do you hunt the prey for lionesses? Do you hunt the prey for the lioness and satisfy the hunger of the lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in a thicket? Who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God and wander about for lack of food? Now, in itself, without understanding all the stuff that y'all have walked through with Job, this chapter probably alone might go, okay, I'm ready for something more exciting. But this, in the context of Job's questions and Job's suffering, is an amazing, immense picture of the beauty of God. Out of all the questions that Job has proposed to God and to his friends, it is interesting perspectives to see God answers in ways that are not direct. Kind of like our prayer life sometimes. At least they are not direct to Job. Job has been seeking God for answers and remedies to his suffering, and God only answers those questions with his might himself. Sometimes our questions to God are misguided, and they're loaded with a potential miss the mark kind of moments when it comes to our own expectations. Now, I've already mentioned one rock band. I'll mention another one, the Allman Brothers. Yeah. Macon, Georgia. Been to the big house, been to Rose Cemetery. Amazing place of history. Now, I really like this song, which my wife ends up calling, oh, that's the public song. It just drives me crazy. But anyway, in memory of Elizabeth Reed. It's a studio version. It's about 7 minutes long. That's the gravestone in Rose Cemetery in Macon, Georgia, of Elizabeth Reed. The live version of this at Fillmore East is over 13 minutes. Now, this song has multiple live recordings, up to 19 minutes long. It's full of great guitar solos and exchanges and just great musicianship. It's an awesome song. It was written by Dickie Betts, one of the guitar players, in 1970 when they lived at the big house in Macon, Georgia, and they would get inspiration for writing songs. There's several songs that have mementos in Rose Cemetery where they, one of them's like Little Martha, stuff like that, all that's from that cemetery. And this was on the gravestone of Elizabeth Reed. And when he wrote this song, this is what came out. It was an amazing song. But if you know that song, In Memory of Elizabeth Reed, if you do, there is one recording that happened in 1992 in Los Angeles, California. It's on the album Second Set. And they come out, and there's no electric guitars. There is no hard drum. It's all an acoustic set with acoustic guitars and an acoustic bass. Now, if you're used to this rockin' jammin' song, just as an illustration point, you're ready to rock out, and you see them coming up, we're going to do this little song. We've never done this before. We're coming, it's not like Greg Allman could talk. He did other things better, but he could barely tell you, we're going to try this song. We've never done this before, and we're going to, we hope it works out, And they come out with this acoustic version, and you're just like, if you know this song and you've heard it multiple times, you're like, man, they're going to do it with guitars with holes in them. Oh, they're going to ruin this song. We've never done this before. We're hoping it'll work out. And then you listen to this. Over 10 minutes of beauty, because there is a depth in this acoustic, and this takes a whole lot more skill because you can do all your wah-wah pedals and all your wow, and it just sounds cooler, and they're just rocking most of it. And they do this, and all it is musicianship, and there's a depth and a beauty to it that you go. And so there's an interesting thought about how you would look at this song as a enjoyer of this kind of music, and you would listen to it and go, yeah, but why can't they just bring out the electric guitars? Because that's what I actually paid money for. But on this particular night, something different happened. It was something special, something that you, on multiple listens, you would just engage going, how do they do that with acoustic guitars? And I think sometimes our questions of God are much like that, where we have all these expectations. We've seen him. We saw what he did with Goliath, with a rock and a little slingshot with a little shepherd boy. We've seen him knock down the walls of Jericho. We've seen him do all kinds of really cool things, like part the Red Sea. We've seen him do the 10 plagues. We've seen God in Scripture do all these things. And then simply we put all that together with all of our understanding going, God, all I want you to really to do is to heal my daughter. And he's just silent. And you get something like Job going, do you think, Bruce, that you could actually hang up the stars in the sky? Do you think you can do that? And you get this answer going, yeah, but that's not what I came for. Much like those concert goers in Los Angeles, to be able to go, acoustic? Really? But when you step in to go, oh my goodness, God is so big. He is so wonderful. He is so great. He's answered my questions bigger than I could have ever asked them. That's what God is doing here with Job. Anyway, Job asks God specific questions about his suffering, and God answers all those questions with himself. And I think the application is the same for you and me. We learn first that human solutions and answers are many times, not all times, but many times misguided and wrong. Secondly, I think when God answers, just like he did with Job, we get a better answer than what we expected to get when we first asked the question. And when you get God himself, and you end up doing this, truly, you end up going, after God says, hey, what about me? And you go, is there anything else? If you start to do that after God has given you himself, then it's like, man, there's nothing left. What you're asking for secondary answers. And so this beautiful thing, I think, is really teaches, and we're going to continue to look at the rest of these couple of chapters of God answering. Thomas Aquinas, the famous medieval theologian, he lived around the 1200s. So that would have been the 13th century. Anyway, so this is a long time ago. And we'll say it's before the internet. Anyway, he created one of the greatest intellectual achievements in Western civilization. If anybody's read this, you're just a genius for even holding it or had it in your library or have read it. It's called the Summa Theologica. It's a massive work, 38 treatises, 3,000 articles, 10,000 objections. And Thomas tried to gather into one coherent whole of all truth. Now, you think this was some kind of nerd. I'm serious. This guy was trying to figure out God stuff. And he wrote about it and asked good questions. He dug. And anyway, you can buy this stuff online. The smallest version I saw was 8 books, about this big. And somehow they've captured this down to here. But it's a massive, I don't know how small the writing is. But it is an undertaking. And he tried to gather all the coherent whole of all truth. And what an undertaking. Anthropology, science, ethics, psychology, political theory, and theology, all under God. And on December 6, 1273, Thomas abruptly stopped his work. And while celebrating Mass in the chapel of St. Thomas, he caught a glimpse of eternity. And suddenly he knew that all his efforts to describe God fell so far short that he decided that he is never going to write again. He just said, I can't do it. God is much bigger than anything I could try to figure out and write about. Here's a brilliant guy who goes, to the end of the matter, I found God at the end of this, and go, oh my gosh, he's so awesome. This is what we can find through the story of Job. This is what we can actually find for our own story. Everything that you're searching for is found only in God himself. It's only found in Christ himself. And when his secretary, Thomas Aquinas' secretary, amazing he had one, Reginald, tried to encourage him to do more writing, he said, Reginald, I can do no more. Such things have been revealed to me that all I have written seems so much of a pile of straw. My human mind cannot fathom the greatness of God. And he stopped writing. So to all of our questions yet unanswered, and all of our attempts to fill in the blanks, can I ask this question? Can God be enough? Can God be enough? Jesus went to the cross for our salvation so that you didn't have to figure out all the right answers. He has paid the price. Jesus is the answer. If you need to respond to God in any way this morning, giving your life to him, need prayer, need to repent, you're welcome to come forward as we stand and as we sing.